Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. So it is a pleasure to have you join our industry coffee chat today. So today we're joined by my former classmates and friends and alumni of HGSE. Eduardo and John are education entrepreneurs. Samantha and Michelle, they are education policy and product design researchers. So we will hear from our panelists in a minute to share some insights in the world of AI and education. I'm very excited. So my name is Nemo, and I'm a tech entrepreneur and a community builder in the intersection of technology and the social sciences. After my graduation from HGSE in 2022, I founded my first edtech startup with Stanford professor Andrew Ng's venture studio to transform the way how people engage with reading. Currently, I'm running the Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs Boston chapter to support the local innovation community and beyond. So without further ado, panelists, could you please give us a short intro about yourself? What's your background and what are you currently working on? And one thing that you miss about HGSE. So I'll start with Eduardo.
That was a long question. Thank you, Nemo, so much for the invite and also for the panel for joining.
Perfect. Thank you.
My name is Eduardo. Everyone can call me Du. I'm currently an education entrepreneur in Brazil with language learning. I have 2 ventures there. And also working as a program manager for the Strategic Data Fellowship within the Center for Education Policy Research here at HGSE. One thing that I miss about HGSE is definitely the community, but I think it's very heartwarming to be here again and to see people's faces.
Welcome, welcome. Next, we'll have Dan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Chedai, originally from Albania, but I still live in Boston after my graduation. I'm the founder of 2 startups. My first startup I launched during COVID, essentially. It's the biggest e-learning platform in Western Balkans, where 91% of all Albanian students use it on a daily basis during COVID, but then it expanded to more Albanian-speaking countries. I'm now the founder of GoTeacher. GoTeacher is building up from our experience with Academy. It's an AI-based platform that essentially automates all of the things that teachers have to do with digital resources from any platform. So Khan Academy, Wikipedia, we want to build a intelligence layer on top of the content that exists out there and sort of recommend it to the most relevant topics for any teacher. And my background is in technology. I did my master's in education. One thing I miss about HGSE is actually taking courses. And since some of us are still around, I'd love the opportunity to meet more professors. I really enjoyed building relationships with professors and learning from their courses. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I resonate with that. Next, we'll have Samantha.
Hi, yes. So I'm currently based in Dubai, but I'm originally from Connecticut. I'm currently working as a researcher for Aleph Education, which is an online personalized learning platform based here in the UAE that works with students grades 5 to 12. So I'm doing on their research side, looking into different areas that we can sort of improve upon, as well as different impacts we have in the communities that we work in.
Awesome. Last but not least, let's have Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I'm located in Seattle, Washington. I work at Microsoft as a design researcher or user researcher, whatever you want to call it. I've been on the education team for 4 years, but at Microsoft for about 6, ever since I left HGSE. I work on products that are specifically for education audiences, and then also partner with products that are used by lots of different people, like Word, things like that. Let's see. It's hard to choose what I miss most about HGSE. I think not to copy others, but both the community and the coursework. I loved all of my classes and often wish that I could take more and go back because 1 year was not enough. But the people definitely and the energy that everyone brings as well.
That is awesome. All right. Thank you again, panelists, for joining us today. Now, I think I liked us to put on a wild imagination hat. And can we please, can our panelists help us imagine a future that is a decade from now? What will be the future of learning and future of teaching and education will look like for you? I think this time we'll start with Michelle.
All right. So honestly, I feel like we can guess, but we have no idea what's going to happen as a true researcher. Yeah, like we can make some hypotheses. You know, education, I feel like, has had these points in time where it's kind of jumped forward, where, you know, computers became big and, you know, it started looking somewhat different. I feel like it's not going to look completely different. Like, we've never seen it, like, I don't know, completely like transform, but I think that like the opportunity there is not to, and I think we'll talk about this later, not like replace teachers, and I don't like that isn't going to be transformed, but I think enhance how teachers are able to do their jobs and save them time maybe on those things that we don't want to focus on, and have them be able to maybe do more of that kind of personal one-on-one connection, those things that teachers really want to spend more of their time on, and less time on the things that they don't want to spend.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
since Don is working on building products and tools for teachers, I wonder what's your imagination for future of education look like?
Yeah, very similar to Michelle, this notion of saving time. So the way I imagine is full mediaification of education, basically like a massive Netflix for learning. That's how I see it, where all of the resources from all the sorts of I don't know, providers are sort of like more aggregated, and I imagine kids on their laptops in the classroom, teacher going around, everyone has some sort of like individualized, a little bit different assignment to the other kid, more personalized, not only in terms of like their style, like do they like a video or do they like an article, but also based on like how far they're progressing relative to other kids. So this is how I imagine it, a super intelligent system, which also changes the role of the teacher a little bit. We're used to the teacher being the main knowledge provider in the classroom. I don't believe that this is going to be the case anymore in the next 10 years. There's going to be a centralized sort of like coming from the district down, what are we going to focus on, and then the role of the teacher is going to be more like a coach, focusing on personal skills, soft skills, and just, I don't know, helping the kids with when they're stuck.
I love what you said about a teacher as a learning coach. And I think, you know, AI is no longer the future. It is already here, changing the way we already normally do things and learn things. So I think my next question for panelists would be, can you share a tangible experience or example of how AI has already transformed a traditional learning experience? This time I'll pass on to Eduardo.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I can give examples from the foreign language learning classroom, right? I remember that many years ago, like when I was in Brazil teaching English, a long time ago, we used to use like a paper dictionary, flip through the words whenever a student would ask, like, how do you say this? And then, you know, a few years later, then we had Google Translate, and they could ask me whatever, entire sentences, and I could just type it down. And there was already some AI there, right? But now I think like there's some really cool things going on. Like when we think of like generative AI this year, if you want to do a flash writing exercise with your students and ask them like, tell me about a childhood memory, or tell me about an object that has sentimental value to you, and you ask them to describe something, and then you can ask ChatGPT later, like rewrite this text acting as whatever or conveying whatever feeling. And then the student gets that new text, they're going to get so much vocabulary specific to that learner, specific to how they're feeling, that they would probably not learn unless they had lived in another country, or it wouldn't come in a textbook as pre-formatted, or, you know, in a standard like vocabulary word bank or something like that. So I think that's one example where like AI is changing today the language learning classroom.
That is wonderful. And it reminds me of Duolingo. Their new feature is to have role play, have students be immersed in that language learning environment so that they can, you know, participate more and develop more confidence, engaging in real life conversations. So that's great. Samantha, could you please also help us understand some of the tangible experiences and examples that AI has transformed some of the traditional learning experience?
Yeah, from my experience, and we've been working a lot with putting it directly onto our online learning platform. We've seen it become like a lot more relaxed with students. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with Conmigo, which is Khan Academy's big take on AI, but a lot of it is that much more informal, just chat back and forth, have kind of a more of a discussion rather than like a traditional classroom setting, and really putting the power in the hands of the students to direct their learning and however they need it to go. And that's kind of, at least in the region that I've been working in, that's what we've been seeing a lot of, is building it right into whatever platform they're already doing as almost a personalized tutor. So the AI already knows what question you're working on. So when you ask, hey, I don't understand, you don't need to put in the entire question. The AI knows the question, and it already knows maybe exactly based on your prior questions in this unit where you might be having trouble, and it knows exactly how to help you. So that sort of personalized, more informal setting in education, I think we're already seeing it now as we speak. So
incredible. I want to pass on the same question to Michelle as well. Since you work at Microsoft, you must have seen a lot of like practices and education initiatives from the company. So what was your experience seeing those transformation happening? Oh, Michelle, I think you are muted.
Thank you. So we can think of, there are different types of AI. So some types of AI have been around for a while. So there are already products out there that heavily use AI, whether we realize it or not. So Microsoft has a series of learning accelerators that they're working on, and one is out already, called Reading Progress. And it's basically, I talked about kind of saving teachers time, the things that they might not want to spend time on. That's kind of the idea behind that one. And where basically a lot of educators are doing these kind of language, kind of reading practices and testing, and seeing, where students omitting words or mispronouncing words. And so it's using AI to basically have students do that on their own and have it graded, and the teacher can come in and fix the grades after, but kind of using AI to do that kind of work, which is different than kind of the LLM kind of type of AI, which is what kind of, I think, is being more explored now, in addition to this other type of AI, where it's more of kind of what Samantha was talking about, where you can kind of just use your own natural language, and it's kind of a different type of interface where you can just kind of talk to things and not necessarily have to press a bunch of buttons or have to navigate a bunch of UI that has, where do I go for this? It's just kind of like, hey, let me ask for what I need and get it back. And that can be used, both on the teacher and on the student side.
I love that. And I love one of my friends being commenting on the emergence of ChatGPT. It's not just simply a chatbot, but it's actually a natural language interface. So how we interact with this new experience of interacting with computer and machines is really matters of how we transform this kind of experience of learning and teaching. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So next question I would like to ask Dan. So as AI becomes the part of education sector, very important, very necessary and integral part, what skills would you recommend and suggest students and educators be developing over the years in an AI-centric world? So for example, what students should know about working with AI and what's ideal partnership between AI and education could look like in the future?
Yeah. Well, we can all agree that we can all have a very different experience with ChatGPT based on how well we learn how to use it. For example, I know people that train ChatGPT to pretend they're like 4 key employees in an organization, and then make ChatGPT like have conversation among this like 5 fictional people. So based on how well you learn ChatGPT, you get a lot more out of it than someone that just doesn't know how to use it very well. For example, we use it a lot for like product management. We have ChatGPT write 99% of all of our user stories, and once you explain to ChatGPT your product very, very well, the user stories are just incredible. You literally think it reads your mind. So prompting ChatGPT, of course, it's important, but yeah, so some prompting skills. But then if you it depends on also how you look at schooling. For example, when I was growing up, I always thought of schooling as you build like the knowledge to solve some problems, because you're probably not going to remember very well like what you learned in these classrooms, but the process of like knowing how to solve these problems and think critically to pass the exams and to, I don't know, make friends, whatever. So I think some of these skills will still be the same: critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and this will be essential. And I think it's going to disrupt assessment. So that's going to be disrupted for sure. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you very much. I think the next question I'll pass on to all panelists. So what are some learning resources or AI tools that you would recommend for our audience to dive deeper into our topic today? So for example, I'll get started sharing some of my learning resources. One of my favorite newsletter produced by Professor Ethan Malik from Wharton, University of Pennsylvania. So this newsletter called One Useful Things. So it has been my inspiration source to learn how to work with AI tools and AI knowledge. So highly recommended to check it out. Second of all, Khan Academy recently launched a series of learning modules called AI for Education. So it's basically AI 101 for teachers and educators. That's a great resource to look at if you are new to this space of AI. And I'll pass on to Samantha to get started if you have anything to share with our audience.
Yeah, so maybe not tools, but someone I've been following is actually Chris Dede. He works at Harvard's Project Zero, and he's just been coming out with some really helpful articles, at least from my side, talking about the augmentation side of things. So not just, letting AI take over a lot of stuff, especially for students. We're talking about them like with testing, like you were just saying, but how to augment their skills. And he was writing some really interesting things in his last few publications, talking about how we really need to emphasize now soft skills in students, social emotional learning, 21st century skills, in order to augment kind of the more rote skills that AI can now do. So I just recommend, honestly, anything he's written, I found really helpful in sort of navigating this area.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Let's next go to Michelle.
Yeah, so I come from a perspective of like implementing and building AI. Again, coming from Microsoft, gonna share a Microsoft resource that I find really helpful, but it's available publicly, called the HAX Playbook, HAX. I can put the link in the chat. But it makes it super digestible in terms of what are the potential kind of like traps that you can have when you are implementing AI, and instead kind of what are the best practices and what should you be doing along your practice. And I think the main takeaway there is like, think about these from the beginning so that your AI is less biased, things like that. So yeah, this was developed not by my team, but I think it's a super useful tool if you're actually building AI.
Thank you. Would you mind share the link to that resource you mentioned?
Just put it in there.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Next, let's go to Eduardo.
Yeah, I think Nemo, you're just the best person to answer this question. You've put so many conferences on EdTech together at this point. I'd say if you have access to HGSE, look out for classes with Seiji Zotani. He's like a new visiting professor. His classes on EdTech. And I think like his perspective is both technical and from the policy standpoint as well. So I took a very nice class with him on AI in the global South, how it is, what are the implementation challenges there, and like how it is actually helping, I don't want to say bridge the gap, but like avoid a wider digital divide between the North and global South. And I think that's a really important thing to pay attention on, especially if you're policy focused. But I think like, MIT Review has been publishing EdTech AI, the EdTech magazine, Education Next, just, there was an article from last week, really, really cool, very comprehensive on AI. If you go there, it kind of like looks like a guide to that article on Education Next. And I mean, you know, going to events, meetups, conferences, knowing people, knowing what people are talking about at this moment is really interesting too. Paulo Nemo.
Thank you so much. It actually reminded me of a professor at MIT Media Lab, Cynthia Brazil. So she's right now initiating an AI education project called MIT Race. I put in the chat. So they developed some curriculum for teachers and educators to be able to teach in their environment in the classroom. So if you are thinking about teaching AI in your classroom, that's a great resource to look at. So last but not least, let's go to Dan to share some resources.
Some of the same resources, I saw that the CTO of Microsoft and code.org are launching a course together on AI. So I guess that's going to be very good as well. So you mentioned most of the resources that I was going to recommend as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right, let's change our gear a little bit.
Can I add one more thing? Yeah. It's actually more of like a open question, but I feel like I don't have a great resource for this. So if anybody does, but I think what's really important for educators and students is reading up on the limitations of AI and how, like one of my biggest learnings is, you know, don't just take what AI gives you, especially in these LLMs, like actually make sure like they can, the word is like hallucinate, you know, they can make things up too. Like, don't just take it as fact when you read these things. And so, yeah, I'm not sure I have a specific resource for that, but I definitely encourage reading up on those sorts of limitations.
So I think recently I came across the MIT Technology Review. They launched a new issue called Ethics. So that's mainly centered around the ethical consideration of AI development and implementations. I'm not sure if that's directly relevant to what you were thinking of, but I think it might be a source for you to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking of like consumers of AI, like the students, the teachers, just knowing like as you use AI. But yeah, if you can put that in the chat, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I will do. Actually, I love that question, and I want to open it to panelists here too. So what do you think some of ethical considerations when we implement AI solutions in the classrooms? And what's your take on how do you navigate this gray area, or how do you make sure student and teacher have positive experience with the system of AI? So what about Samantha? Could you give us some thoughts?
Yeah, I think that at this point we have to be aware that it's going to start happening. And so any of those teachers who kind of want to pretend that it's not going to be a part of it or completely shut it out of their classroom are going to find kids who are going to be really, really unhappy with them. So I think what we have to do in classrooms then is to find a way to smartly incorporate it in a very controlled setting potentially, as well as then find times when it's not always applicable. So I recently went to a classroom that was using AI in art classrooms. The teacher would give the students a topic. They would maybe do some prompting into ChatGPT to help them find a topic they were comfortable creating into art. And then they went off and made it themselves. So it was a really beneficial way for the kids to, again, augment their own maybe creative skills, but then go off and make their art with their own like hands. I think they were actually doing like computer art, but then again, so that's a way to bring it into the classroom in a controlled way, I guess is probably the way I would hope it would go.
I love that idea. Dan, could you share some of your thoughts with us as well?
Can you please repeat the question one more time?
Some ethical consideration of using AI in the learning and the teaching space.
Sure. So the main thing, for example, is intellectual property. So I think that all the companies which invested heavily on assessment are hugely disadvantaged, because what you can do right now is just literally copy the assessment of a company, put it on ChatGPT and say, rephrase these questions for me. And you can essentially copy someone else's work. So there are a lot of ethical considerations around intellectual property. I know a lot of teachers, for example, who are copy pasting questions from a assessments book on ChatGPT, and they're asking ChatGPT to generate topics which are rephrased a little bit differently, but they are for this specific unit or skill. So that's number one. And then also ethical considerations, of course, when it comes to assessment and cheating, there should, I think it's going to become like really soon a thing that most learning management system, I think Google Classroom is introducing it, have embedded AI check on them. I think that's not a very hard thing to do. So I guess for me, it's all right now I'm thinking all about intellectual property, and all of these big companies investing probably billions of dollars on content, on curriculum, and now they're sort of they can be exploited very easily to build content if you're like a young startup.
Yeah, that reminded me of one of the events I've been to at MIT. I forgot the professor's name, but he proposed this idea of learn right instead of copyright, what we have in the current world. Does AI model, or do AI models in the future have the right to learn the information that's proprietary or IP related? So I think this is definitely an interesting area to look at in the world of legal. So Eduardo, I wonder what's your experience? So you embrace AI technologies, you embrace all emerging technologies. I wonder if you see any challenges language teachers would face when they are working with AIs. And what do you think the future for the language teachers will look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts on, will the role of the teacher be changed, or will the teacher ever be replaced? But as you know, as mentioned here before by other folks, I think on the teacher-facing side, there's a lot of benefits, right? To planning your classes, to teaching more creatively, changing assessment models. And I think even like AI is now assessing written text from students, helping teachers with things they might be even missing out on, or which could save them time. With these pieces together, I do think like teachers could feel more empowered to use their time to focus on more creative learning experiences. Think of how they could make learning more centered around the learners, and but I think one challenge thinking of like language teachers across the globe is, do they have access to all of that? Do they have access to all the information? Do they even know of the existence of so many platforms that they could be using? So I think like there's a big difference comparing like what language teachers will do in the US and what will language teachers do in the global South. I do hope that we can work towards a world with less of a digital divide, so that these teachers can also like benefit the student outcomes across the globe. I do think that it's going to save them more time and going to make learning more tailored.
And that's great perspectives. Thank you so much. So next, I want to shift the gear towards a more fun and tangible ways to have us look at some perspectives, the implementations of AI that we could potentially do. Let's do a case study at HGSE, for example. So I want to ask our panelists what type of changes that you hope to see with the system of AI, that in what ways you think AI could transform the learning at HGSE specifically. So I'll open up to Michelle.
Yeah, so I was in HGSE in 2016, 2017. So I feel like it's already changed since then, like since COVID and everything. But I mean, I feel like at HGSE, first of all, like, I feel like we need to know, I almost feel like that should be like a foundational course when you go to HGSE of just like learning about AI and like the limitations of AI, like what it is. Like, I think it's just such kind of like a black box. Like, I'm learning so much myself even. So I feel like that's pretty important, is to just like, not even how it's taught, but just like, let's teach everybody about it. Whether that's, as a consumer or a creator of AI, I just feel like it's going to be everywhere and we have a lot to learn. In terms of changing kind of how our learning looks, yeah, I mean, I think it could be kind of an assistant potentially to kind of what Samantha was talking about, like, hey, I'm having, I'm having questions about this, or hey, I want to dig further into this. I mean, I think like teachers and students, you know, they don't want to necessarily have that kind of social aspect taken away. But at the same time, it could help make education more inclusive for those that maybe the social aspect isn't as important. So yeah, kind of a winding answer, but there's so many different options here.
Samantha, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, so I actually did my Harvard year during COVID, so I was fully online. I never got to go to campus. So I always think now, looking back, everything I did was on the Canvas website. If there was now a way to maybe add some sort of AI aspect to that, because sometimes when I was just doing work and I was in different time zones from my cohort, it would have been maybe a way to ask those questions or to almost feel like I was in a group study, which we tried with Zoom like this, but we couldn't always do it because again, of time zones and COVID making everything hard. So if there was a way at that point and even going forward, similar to including those chats or including some way that across time we can work with our cohort on Canvas so that for more online focused learning that we're able to sort of make it more of a community experience instead of an isolating moment.
That's awesome. So Don, you enrolled HGSE post-COVID. So what was your experience and which ways you think HGSE could implement AI solutions into their learning experience?
Sure. All these ideas are very good. I would personally not focus on the end customer, which is the students. I would focus on using AI to advance research. HGSE is doing a lot of research and they have done a lot of research. They have a lot of papers they've written. I would use AI to scan this paper, put it in like a common database, and then leverage the huge potential that a technology like ChatGPT has to advance this research. So essentially you would train your personal ChatGPT with research papers written from HGSE professors and the vast amount of resources found on the libraries, including, I don't know, coursework students have created, and then use that knowledge to advance the research in a much more, I don't know, multidimensional way, I'm assuming.
I love it. And Michelle also commented to build off your perspective, using AI to reduce admin load at HGSE will be super helpful. So yeah, next go to Eduardo.
Yeah, I think like I agree with Don. Like I think as a leading educational institution, I think HGSE has a lot of responsibility. You know, in terms of like research that's been coming out. And I think like making it available in a very responsible way, just, you know, making sure that are we researching everything that goes into AI, right? Like data privacy or ethical considerations, as it was mentioned here earlier. I think that's, you know, not just the shiny part of it, like learning experience, which is great, but just making sure that we're also worried about other implications.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think next I'll leave some room for Q&As from our audience. Lisa, I'll pass on that to you.
Great. Thank you. This is so wonderful. And we know that this is a very important and sort of hot topic right now in the education world. And so we wanted to leave enough time for questions. I'm going to give everyone the opportunity. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you. And you can also put your questions into the chat. I did want to start with a couple of the pre-submitted questions that we got in the alumni community. Some are similar questions, and I think also relate back to the conversation that was had. But so I thought our panelists could weigh in about what specific tools and resources you feel are beneficial to students across levels. So starting, you know, from pre-K all the way up through graduate school. And maybe these are also resources that we could share out in our email next week. So I'm just opening it up.
So I think we shared some of the resources to learn about AI in education earlier. And then there's another resources for, I think it's within Google, they develop a series of curriculum for people to understand generative AI. And as we know, generative AI right now play a big role in, a lot of humanity courses and creative courses, because AI has the ability to summarize things, to help you clarify things, and to deepen your thinking into more reflective ways. And you will kind of have quote unquote creativity side of things to help you brainstorm more ideas and to help you collaborate better with others. So I think definitely check out those resources from Google to be able to understand how to work with generative AI, what limitations and what potentials they would have in terms of perform some of the coursework or assignments that teachers, educators would tend to give to the classroom. And I'll pass on to Samantha.
Honestly, I can't think of any other additional sources off the top of my head, if I'm honest with you. But yeah, I feel like just kind of keeping an eye out for what's up and coming right now. And yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have anything else to add at the moment for other sources.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Jazib, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. So guys, thank you so much for this session. It's been awesome. And I'm doing some work in AI in education as well. So I actually recently taught a session in my home country of Pakistan on AI in education. And I was trying to kind of expose people from different teaching and administrative backgrounds to how AI would affect education. But I realized a lot of my session was quite theoretical, that, AI could do this in education, AI could do that in education. And people fairly ask me, okay, but what is AI in education? What's happening right now? Because when I show them Khan Mingo, I'm like, okay, that's still at test phase and it costs $20 a month. And people in my country are not going to be paying for that unless they're sure that it's going to be creating some value. So let's say somebody kind of from a more resource constrained environment, and that of course could be anywhere in the world, asks you, where is AI coming in the classroom right now that teachers should be aware of? What do you think are already kind of the mainstream application areas, or are they not there yet and we still have to wait to see what they might become?
I can chime in. I think whereas ChatGPT can be a paid service, there's Bard, which is free. But I think there might be not available in some countries, but there are other language models being released, or it's worth Googling for a list of them, because I know that some free ones. And I think just combining that with all of the wealth of different guides and instructions that came out on how to make prompts and how to change whatever class. I think there's so many different topics already out. And I think, taking the time to plan that out, I think that really is worth it, even when you're thinking of a brick and mortar classroom, or when you're thinking of very somewhere where teachers might not have all the different devices, and where students don't have all of their personal devices as well in the classroom.
Great. So I want to ask a question in the chat from Cynthia. What ways do you think and educate about bias in AI?
Just to follow up, is that from kind of I guess I can give from a kind of product making perspective, and feel free to chime in if I'm not quite answering the question. But I think bias in AI, it happens at kind of every level of creating it, from kind of what is the data that you're bringing in, to also just educating about the bias on the interface itself when you're actually providing the AI. So I think a lot of large language model kind of interfaces are including an element within their UI that's saying hey, make sure you actually double check the information there. And so I think both thinking about it as you build the AI, but then also showing and educating the user themselves and saying hey, at the end of the day, this is not a perfect thing. And being kind of upfront and honest about that, and telling them, because I think some people don't actually know that. And so making sure that that's actually within the interface as well.
Great. Lisa, go ahead.
So this has been very interesting. Thank you. Given that we have knowledgeable panelists available to us, I am curious of about what you would say to a teacher, excuse me, who is trying to figure out how to use AI. Like, what do you see as the greatest advantages, and what do you see as the biggest potential problems in an educational environment? That's part of my question. And the second part of it is, AI is a tool, and in order to judge the utility of tools, it's nice to start from what you're trying to accomplish. What's your philosophy of education? Some of the answers you all have given held elements of that, but we haven't talked about it explicitly. And I guess I want an answer to my second question first and my first question second, if that makes sense, because one flows from the other.
I think I can respond to that. And again, not sure. Let me know if I'm not quite answering the question, but I think when you are talking to educators, like, I think starting with the problem first is important. So like, what are the things that they want help with? Not like, and I think we talked about this at HGSE too, like it's a tool, right? It's not like, we shouldn't come with the technology and then be like, let's apply it everywhere. We need to start with what is the problem that the teachers are actually having. And then if AI can help solve that, then great. And I think that kind of coming from that perspective, I think might help them understand and like see the value of AI. And it's not like, hey, there's AI, like, let's stick it here, here, and here. But like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Oh, why don't you try this out, see if it works for you? That sort of thing. Is that kind of, Lisa, what you're thinking about, or is that totally?
It's related, but the problem with that answer
Yeah.
is that I think you on the panel are so accustomed to using AI that your level of knowledge is far beyond what the average school teacher has. And so if you go to the average teacher and say, what are your problems? Here's how AI can help you. The teacher is not even going to be able to know which problems to present to you. Like, can AI help me with the kid who's disrupting my classroom? Can AI help me with the kid who is dyslexic and is struggling to read? I mean, there are all kinds of questions, issues that teachers face in a classroom. And AI can only help with some of those issues. And AI can also streamline, you've talked about, all of you, some ways that AI can streamline processes that go on in a classroom. Teachers, the average teacher is not going to have a clue about that, at least not yet.
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at was like, don't enter the conversation with the goal of using AI, just like in your everyday conversations, right? Teachers say like, oh, I'm having a problem with X. And like, if in that conversation, you're like, oh, I actually think AI could help with that. You know, like I guess what I'm getting at is AI isn't always the answer. So just like in your everyday conversations, they say X, and maybe you as the AI expert can suggest an AI or non-AI thing to help them. Does that?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting to you is that as the AI experts, I would recommend that you might want to list out ways AI can be used in a classroom environment in a productive way, along with user stories. So you're actually giving examples, and then challenges presented by AI. The most obvious one is plagiarism. So I'm just suggesting that as a perspective, because sometimes when you're an expert, it's hard to hold the beginner perspective in your mind at the same time.
No, totally. That makes a lot of sense.
And if I can just add just a quick thing, it's also up to people who are building the AI apps and the product managers just to make sure that AI is integrated in a very seamless way for the teacher, so they don't even know it's there. So for example, Google Classroom has small little like widgets coming up now, which are completely AI, and the teacher doesn't even know that they're interacting with AI. So I think it's the role of us as people building startups and like product managers to make sure that they integrate AI into their products for teachers in a way which is completely seamless. And because if the teacher has to go and learn how to do it, that's not the purpose of AI. Is to automate things and make it actually easier. It shouldn't add an extra step. So I think it's yeah, just I would tell teachers, be patient. We're gonna we must figure it out. They shouldn't worry about like, oh, how shall I integrate this into my teaching?
Yeah, and to echo that, and I think it does take time and take collaborative efforts, as some people mentioned in the chat, to have professional development and teacher training, be able to equip teachers with the knowledge and the skills to work with those type of tools and systems. It's almost like 10 years before, when iPad was introduced to a classroom, people are so excited about digital learning and digital this and digital that, and it takes very, very long time for people to really integrate some of the iPad technology in the classroom. I think so. Same thing is happening right now, that we need trainings, that we need awareness, and also we need a lot of those initiatives going on to be able to help teachers be able to understand the technology in general. Chris, do you have a question?
I do. It actually follows on from Lisa's question. I'm glad that the focus, at least in the beginning part of the talk, was on the students and the tools to help students, because I think that's ultimately the people we're trying to help. But I work with a lot of teachers, just like we were just talking about, who are really scared of AI. They're really worried about cheating, quite frankly. I mean, most teachers are like, wow, this is a way my students are going to not learn by cheating and using this, and I won't be able to tell. And that's probably the hardest part. I'm finding that in my own classes now, where I think they're using AI tools to cheat, and I can kind of prove it, but not to the extent that I would do. I would take them up to an honor board or something like that. So I think focusing on how do we teach the teachers, because I love the fact that we're focusing on students, but it is about the teachers who are really scared about this. They're also scared about being replaced. Dean talked about this in his chat, where he said, teachers aren't going to be the sole providers of information a decade from now. That scares a lot of teachers, and I think would scare away a lot of teachers who don't want to be a glorified TA, let's say, where the students are learning everything from a screen. And my question really is, and I think it's been covered somewhat, is how do we get teachers on board with AI learning? How do we make the transition easiest, and how do we make it so that they want to keep teaching, because it's going to be very different?
I kind of wonder if, sorry, go ahead,
No, go.
Samantha.
I just think one way that we could start is kind of highlighting that it can only take over part of it, that education is still really human-centered. And as of right now, it can't take over all of it. Like, it's in the works, but it's not possible. So teaching, like showing teachers how it can be beneficial to them. So something that we've been currently seeing in classrooms here in the UAE is that there's some automated grading built into our systems. And while that takes away some of the teachers' load, it does open them up for more time working with students one-on-one, dealing with them disruptive students in class. So it's giving them more time to do the human-centered focus that is so vital to being a teacher, and kind of taking away, again, like some of those administrative tasks that they just often just take up so much time. So even just like that little bit of things where it can like, you might not see it as helping you with classroom management, but because it's giving you time to focus on classroom management, then it's sort of easing your plate even just a little bit.
And that is a great question. I don't think I have an answer, but I think right now there are some professors and teachers are developing AI tools and using AI actively at Harvard here. So maybe we can learn from their experience practicing those approach. So Professor, who's the professor teaching CS50? Malin, I think Professor
Malin.
Yeah, David Malin. So he's been developing a AI solution as a code interpreter and also a code educator to be able to help students untangle some of the coding processes. And it's being implemented in the VS Code, the Virtual Studio coding environment, as well as developed a AI assistant to answer students' questions regarding the assignments and so on and so forth. And it shows, huge success right now. And Harvard right now has a new initiative called STEM Generative AI Initiative, where they want to create a platform for general education as well as STEM education to be able to facilitate some of the learning and teaching in that environment. So there are a lot of people talking about, those initiatives and actively working on them. So I think it will be really nice to create a space for people to learn from, okay, what did you learn from those implementations, and what kind of concerns and challenges you are facing. So I think these are great to start.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and I love the comment from Michael that I just posted about helping teachers get their life back a little bit. Yeah, I taught for a year too. I think there's always going to be, places where AI can help, but then there are also, always going to be places where or maybe not always, but we're just starting to learn, the places that AI, has its challenges and how to overcome those challenges. I don't think we know the answer. And one of those things that you mentioned, Chris, is in assessments. And this isn't quite an answer, but more of just an open question and wondering, do we have to think about transforming how assessments work? Kind of thinking about, with math assessments, when calculators came about, some people say, hey, let's not use calculators. And some are like, hey, let's use calculators and focus on other skills, or kind of similarly, open note exams. Do we think about, hey, AI is going to be a part of this no matter what? So let's try and kind of up level the kind of learning that we're doing, or the kind of learning that we're evaluating or assessing here.
Great. So as we're wrapping up here, I want to try to address some of the questions that came into the chat as we're having this great conversation. So Bettina had asked, how will AI affect how we use open educational resources and massive resource repositories built around that?
I just had a question. What do you mean the massive repositories built around that? Do you mean YouTube, or what does she mean?
Bettina, do you want to elaborate on your question?
Sure, thank you. I think any of them. It could be YouTube. It's we have content in different museums, different nonprofits are doing it. It's we do it around the world. There's the MOOCs, we have them at Harvard. There's so many different opportunities and possibilities. Will AI replace them? Should we still invest in that? Should we maybe think about AI helping in vetting and finding the right resources? How is curriculum development being effective? It's a big question, I know, but any thoughts would be appreciated.
So you mean also non-digital resources or primarily digital resources?
That's a good question. Didn't think about it. Would appreciate if you can differentiate between the two options.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I'm doing some work around this. So I personally believe that generative AI is not going to replace open educational resources. I think it's more about I think education is not about creating new things. I think it's more about taking what's out there and aligning it in a more personalized way. So I would see it more like a recommender system, which recommends based on what you've done before. It recommends resources to you from everywhere. So it must be digitalized, I think, digitized. Rather than having generative AI, I don't know, creating the article from scratch. I don't see any usefulness in that personally.
right, great. So we're approaching the top of the hour here. I see that there's still a lot of lively conversation going on in the chat. And I just want to make sure that I note that we'll send out a follow-up email next week. I know we've talked about that in the chat a little bit too, which will include contact information for our panelists, as well as a copy of this chat, which has so many great resources and information for folks to refer to. The session was recorded, as you can see, and so we will also share a link to that recording. And so please look out for that next week. And I just want to say thank you so much to Nemo and to our panelists. This was a really interesting and timely discussion. I really enjoyed hearing from all of your expertise. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Can I just see if there are other people who are interested in being part of the conversation around college access and college admission and the use of AI? It's been an ongoing conversation. I'm actually outside of Gutman right now, but would love to have other people engaging in the conversation. I've been doing it since about December, but it's obviously related to secondary and higher ed as well. So.
Sarah, I can see that Michael Maxwell just responded in the chat saying he'd like to be part of the conversation and gave his email.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you again for bringing us together.